So we did a pooled analysis of all the MagnetisMM studies. So there are 4 studies that enrolled the relapsed refractory multiple myeloma patients. What this pooled analysis was about was trying to look at who the BCMA refractory patients or BCMA exposed patients are previously. They could have received a BCMA CAR-T, BCMA antibody drug conjugate in the past. Now, re-exposure to a BCMA targeted bispecific antibody, would that have any impact or would that result in responses is the question that was asked. And the second part of the question was like, how safe is it? Are there any increased risk of infections? What was the rates of CRS? What were the rates of ICANS? All these questions were addressed in the specific trial. So the study design involved a pooled analysis of 4 different trials, the MagnetisMM trial, the MagnetisMM-9 trial. Different trials had different designs, but one common unifying feature is the relapsed refractory multiple myeloma patients that were enrolled on these trials that have received a BCMA-targeted therapy, and they also have received a prior BCMA-targeted therapy. So we identified close to 89 patients fit this criteria across all these 4 different trials. And when you look at these 89 patients, a major fraction, around 59 patients, received ADC alone. It's a BCMA-targeted antibody drug conjugate. Close to 40 of them have received a prior CAR-T, which was BCMA-directed therapy. So the median age is younger for those patients who received a CAR-T, which is expected because these are the young fit patients. And what is very unique about the characteristics of these patients were these are heavily refractory patient populations. So those patients that received a prior ADC had 8 prior lines of therapy. Those patients that received a prior CAR-T had 7 prior lines of therapy. So this is a heavily refractory patient population. If you start breaking down by how many lines of therapy they've seen, what is their refractoriness or refractory status? So around 55% in each of these arms were penta-refractory. That means they have seen a prior IMiD, prior PI, 2 prior IMiDs, 2 prior PIs, and 1 CD38 antibody. Now, if you break it down further, around 39% of the patients were hexarefractory. This is a new statement where these patients had seen, in addition to the 5 I described, these patients had seen a prior BCMA-targeted therapy as well. So this is a new group of patients. We don't know what the standard of care for these patients is. And how do these patients do? What is the natural history going to be? We don't know any of those. So that is where this trial really helps us to see what the benchmarks are. What can we expect in terms of responses for these patient populations? We were able to see response rates, overall response rate of close to 46% of the patients. So patients who had a prior CAR-T had 52% response rates. Patients who had a prior ADC, their responses that are slightly lesser. In terms of the duration of responses, this duration of response among the patients that were responding, they continue to derive much long-term responses beyond the 1-year mark, 1.5-year mark. If you look at the PFS for this entire cohort is 5.5 months. So there are drugs that were approved in myeloma that we use now, which have a PFS of less than 3 months. So this is very helpful for us to understand that you can re-challenge these drugs in patients who had seen prior BCMA-targeted therapies. And more importantly, the biggest question that comes to our minds is, does it increase the risk of infection risk? Because that's one common theme that we're seeing nowadays with all these BCMA-targeted therapies. So this pooled analysis did not show that there was any increased risk of infections. It did not show there is any increased risk of CRS compared to what is expected for the baseline. Did not show there is any increased risk of ICANS. So it's a win-win. Yes, you found a benchmark in terms of the efficacy. You found a benchmark in terms of the CRS, ICANS, infections. So this is a potential option for this BCMA refractory patients, the new hexarefractory patient population. So the post-BCMA space is the new post-CD38 space. So we need newer treatment options. Fortunately, we have targets. We have targets like the GPRC5D, FCRH5. And an additional option is, this is an extra option for the patients to receive a BCMA-targeted therapy for those patients that were BCMA in the post-BCMA space.